Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, and welcome to my first ever headphone review. This has been a long time in the making, and I hope you guys bear with me while I try out this new type of content. My test subject for today is the brand new Kiwi Ears Atheia. It's a dual driver closed back headphone priced at $350 US. Kiwi Ear has been on a bit of a tear recently. They've released 5 new headphones in the span of about 3-4 months, ranging from the budget-focused division all the way up to the Atheia here. With its wooden cups, very premium build, and dual drivers, how does the Atheia do in what is actually a very competitive price range? Well, let's find out. Quick disclaimer before we get started, this particular Atheia was sent to me by Linsoul for review. I'm not being paid for this review, but because I could technically turn around and sell this if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to Linsoul for sending me the set, and thank you all for your support. Let's go ahead and get started with the unboxing experience. As you've probably seen from my unboxing video, the unboxing experience here is simple, but I would say very premium. Inside the box, you will find this carry case, which is the same sort of case that they include on their Ardor headphone. This case carries the headphone and the cable inside and features a removable tray. Open it up and get it to you. This tray means that the headphones and the cable sort of sit inside really nicely. You can also maybe fit like a small dongle deck in here if you really wanted to. Another thing I really like about this is removable. So if you really wanted to, you could just use the case as sort of storage thingy and not have to hold the headphones in here. It's it's kind of nice. You can store other things here. The case itself is, I would say, decently sturdy, but even with the headphones inside, this middle part has some flex to it. I don't know if you can see that in the camera there. Fortunately, that's where the cable goes, so it should work okay in terms of crush protection, as here where the cups are is relatively sturdy. Same goes up here with the headband. As long as you don't, abuse this case, I think it'll work pretty well as a just sort of travel case. And that's basically it. You get the case, the cable, and the headphones in terms of accessories. I think this is fine. I question the decision not to include a 1/4-inch adapter in the box. A lot of amps still use 1/4-inch connectors, and I feel like it's a pretty standard inclusion on most headphones. And while I already have a ton of them and I don't miss the inclusion, it's a little odd that they didn't include one here. But let's take a closer look at that cable. This is a dual material cable, and we're going to get started by looking at the bottom half of it here. You've got this cloth material in this sort of black with white sort of dash pattern. It's a bit thin, but it's very sturdy in the hands, and it feels, really nice to just sort of run through your hands. If you wrap your cable, it can exhibit a little bit of memory for some of the curves and bends, as you can see. But it's fairly easy to coax into whatever shape you want without too much trouble. The connector on here is a single-ended 3.5mm connector. There's no branding or anything on the jack, but it is knurled. I like the overall hardware design here. It's pretty nice, and the strain relief is very long and very sturdy, which I like. The Y-split is made of the exact same type of sort of metal hardware. You've got the ridges there. An interesting thing about this Y-split is it features a chin slider, which I think is really interesting. The Y-split here is also where the material of the cable changes. So you go from this cloth material to this sort of plasticky material that you can see the conductors through. Now, it does feel a little bit rubbery in the hands. It's not my favorite material. It can feel rubbery, especially if it rubs against your skin, say if you're wearing something with like a larger collar, or it rubs against your cheek. It's not the greatest thing, and it's not as compliant, I will say, in terms of wrapping as the bottom half is. It's just a little bit harder to manage, but it's not completely awful. It mostly behaves. The hardware here is matching the rest of the gear, and it is color-coded for right and left, which I like to see. The connectors themselves, as you can see, are indexed to lock in place for the headphone, making it a very secure mount onto the headphone. It means they won't get pulled out easily in the event of an accident. What it also means is replacement cables are a bit harder to come by, but more on that later. Overall, I will say it's a pretty decent cable. It doesn't feel overly thin or heavy. It also doesn't feel very, flimsy. The chin slider, I think, is a great inclusion. It makes me think that they were thinking about, using this headphone on the go, which is something that I advocate for. Lightweight, travel headphones, especially closed backs, are really good for taking places. The user experience is nice to deal with. It didn't get in the way of my enjoyment of the headphone, which I think is important. Again, I would have really preferred a 1/4-inch adapter, but honestly, it's fine. It's not obviously bad. I think it's a fine cable for a $350 headphone. Okay, so I added this section in here after scripting the rest of the review because I found a bit of an issue involving the way the Atheia and the stock cable that I have are wired. I was sitting here trying different sort of aftermarket cables to see which ones fit inside those sockets. And I noticed that essentially any aftermarket cable that I tried was exhibiting a weird issue where I would only get sound out of the left ear cup on the Atheia. It was very weird. I basically got nothing on this ear cup and I would get sound out of this one. So I pulled out my multimeter and I got testing. And what I found was that for some reason, the Kiwi Ears Atheia here has the right cable connector wired so that the signal comes out of the ring connector here in the middle versus the tip connector here on top, which is different from essentially every other dual 3.5 millimeter cable that I've dealt with. These are both, the signal is going through both of the tips here, and even on these ones that are just tip and sleeve, the signal is going through the tip on both of these. What that means is you can only use the stock cable. I did reach out to Kiwi Ears and to Linsoul to figure out what was going on here. And basically what happened is the very early batch of units that ended up mostly in the hands of reviewers has this issue. What makes it even stranger is if you swap the left and right connectors, you put the left one on the right ear cup and the right one on the left ear cup, you get no sound at all. So the ear cup itself is also wired to accept signal from the ring. They assured me that all of the production pairs have this issue resolved. But if for some reason you own this pair and you have this issue where if you use any aftermarket cable, you only get sound out of one ear cup, they told me to contact Kiwi Ears and they will take care of you and make sure that you get a proper version of this headphone. I personally am not going to send mine in for repair or for replacement, I'll say, because I'm honestly going to leave the stock cable on there. And if the stock cable breaks on me for some reason, I can just open up the cups myself and, rewire the connector myself. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to put this in as a quick, sort of public service announcement for anyone who's watching this who might already have the Atheia. Try swapping out your connectors. Put the right one on the left one on the right one. And if there's no sound, go ahead and contact Kiwi Ears and they'll take care of you. So with that over, back to the review. Okay, in terms of build quality and materials, I'm actually pretty impressed with the Atheia here. I'm already a sucker for wooden ear cups, so seeing walnut on the Atheia here is great for me. The Kiwi Ears logo here is cut into the ear cups, and it kind of made me want to take a paint marker to the logos and see if I could fill them in with a little splash of color. The 3.5 millimeter connectors on the bottom of the cups here have locking hardware in them. You see? Yep, there you go. What that means is you don't have to use the stock cable. If you can get one that's thin enough to fit in the hole past the sort of locking lugs there, you can use whatever cable you want. What I found is that if it fits the Meze 99 Classic with that very thin 3.5 millimeter connector, it will fit the Atheia. So use that as guidance if you're going to be shopping for aftermarket cables. As far as the rest of the cups go, there's really no venting or features on the rest of the cup except for these large slotted vents up top. You can see they have a bit of a damping foam or some material on them. These don't leak sound hardly at all. I was sitting next to my wife with the volume turned up fairly loud just to test the sort of sound leakage, and there was next to no leakage. She couldn't tell what I was wearing at all, so don't worry about people hearing your embarrassing music habits while you're wearing these. The ear pads here are vegan leather with built-in fabric filters with L and R stereo indicators on them. The pads are symmetrical, so they're not like thicker on one side and thinner on the other. They're also not available to buy replacements as of right now. I did ask Kiwi Ears if they were going to be making replacements available, and they said that there are plans to make the pads as well as replacement headbands available at a later date, so hopefully that comes to pass. As far as the pad quality goes, they're fairly nice. They have a good squish to them. They're fairly comfy. I'll talk about that a bit more in the comfort section. The ear cups themselves are attached to these aluminum yokes that have full swivel in one direction and sort of partial swivel in another. I like that. I would prefer they swiveled in both directions fully, but I understand what they're going for. So if you're sort of wearing them on your head like this and you pull them off, you can set them flat against your chest and wear them out and about if you're going around with them. Underneath the ear pads, go ahead and pull one of these off. See if I can do this on camera in a competent way. As you can see, they use the sort of fabric lip attachment method, which isn't my favorite. I would prefer something with clips or something a bit more secure, but then again, they're not glued down like some other companies do, so plus points for that, guys. But yeah, underneath you can see the planar driver is sitting front and center dead in the middle of the ear cup, and you can't really make out the 50mm dynamic unless you sort of peek into the slot, and you can kind of see the topological ridges of the diaphragm underneath there. So the dynamic driver has this large circular paper over it, as well as a acoustic paper up here and another acoustic paper down here. So really only has those holes around the planar to get sound out. And if you look at the planar from the right angle, you can sort of see the bar magnets that do the planar effect in there. So that's pretty cool to see. Another thing that's cool to see is this little notch they have cut in the sort of retention lip for the ear cups. That basically means that putting the pads back on is a little bit easier, but again, would prefer a clip or snap-on mechanism. Size adjustment is via these two sliding lugs here. They're really, really smooth. They're sturdy enough to not move around much in everyday use, so they'll hold your position very well, but they're also loose enough that you can make adjustments fairly easily. The headband is a suspension-style band, as you can see here. It moves up and down. However, it's not elasticized, so if you want to put it back to its small position, you have to push it down yourself. So you put them on, it goes up to the top position. If you want to put it back, you have to pull it down. I don't prefer that. I'd rather it was elasticized, but then again, the elastic is just another thing that will wear out long term. And honestly, once it's in the position you have it in, it doesn't really move, so you don't really need to be adjusting it all that often, and it provides good support either way. The two yokes here, as you can see, are connected by these two pieces of what I think is spring steel. It's design I've seen on a couple of other headphones. What I will say is, like most other designs of this type, striking these metal bands or rubbing up against them or pricking them, the sound will get transmitted into the cups very easily. I didn't get a ton of noise from them while wearing these, but every once in a while I would like yawn or laugh or move my jaw in a way, and it would sort of make the headband move, and I get a little bit of sound in either cup. It wasn't too bad, and I think it would be better on a smaller head. Overall, I think these headphones are extremely well made. They don't feel cheap or flimsy in the hands at all. The wooden cups are very nice. The metal hardware feels extremely solid. You can see good fasteners and screws everywhere. The construction just overall feels very premium, and I feel like it's worthy of the $350 asking price that Kiwi Ears wants here. So let's go ahead and pull up the vital statistics for the Kiwi Ears Atheia. The most interesting thing to me here is the dual driver implementation. You've got a 50mm composite diaphragm dynamic driver, as well as that little 14mm planar driver that we're so used to seeing in IEMs these days. I believe they're crossed over, but I don't know that for a fact. I couldn't determine it from the experiments that I ran or looking at it from the front. I'd have to take the rest of the headphone apart, and I didn't want to do that during testing. In terms of weight, these came in just over 350 grams, 377 if you're including the cable. I measured the clamp force on these with my methodology to be 397 grams, which is about average for the closed back headphones in this price range that I've tested, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in the comfort section. In terms of drivability, the Apple USB C dongle was able to push these to 111.7 decibels at 1 kilohertz, which in my opinion is honestly plenty of volume. It means you shouldn't really need an amp to drive these. I'm not going to stop you from getting one, but you shouldn't need one. Don't need to go out and grab one if you have these. The stock cable here has an impedance of 1 ohm, which is fairly typical for headphone cables, and it should make finding replacements pretty simple so long as they fit inside the ear cups themselves. Overall, outside of the dual driver configuration, nothing really out of the ordinary here in terms of weight, clamp force, drivability, or any of that stuff. But now it's time for the cool wall. And as I have mentioned already, y'all know I am a sucker for wooden ear cups. I think they add a lot of personality and character to a set of headphones, and they can blend in pretty well with furniture or the surrounding environment if you're going to put them on display somewhere, in the living room or somewhere. The Atheia here is on the understated side in terms of overall showiness. It's got very classic lines, smooth curves, no harsh angles or hard edges. They look very sleek overall, and to my eyes, I think these are pretty darn cool, so that's where they're going to go. They're going to inaugurate the headphone version of the Cool Wall, and we'll see where the rest of the things I have fill in. They've seen IEMs, they've seen true wireless stereo buds, and now, headphones. How does the Atheia here do when faced with the discerning tastes of the Council of Ladies? Starting off with our standard "Is this pretty?" question, we have a neutral verdict that skews slightly positive, 2 pretties, 1 not pretty, and 2 mez. In terms of compliments, however, those 2 mez turn into no's, so don't be expecting to draw too many eyes while wearing these out and about. Finally, here are their thoughts. A little bit of love for the wood cups here, as well as some love for Mrs. Audio Amigo, who's the model for all my real-world photos. Some pragmatism in terms of performance and comfort trumping looks. Lady number 4 digs the wood, and I haven't seen air traffic control headphones used to describe these. I think it's a bit of an interesting take. But overall, I would say it's a neutral opinion that skews maybe slightly positive. Okay, time to talk comfort, which is really, really important for headphones. I honestly think the Atheias are pretty well thought out. I already mentioned the ease of adjustment with these swivel and these posts, they're moving up and down. The self-adjusting headband is extremely well padded, and in my use did not cause any hot spots on the top of my head. One thing I will say, it does not return to 0. So if you're going to put these on a headphone stand, hang them from the metal yokes, not the headband. It's just good practice for that sort of thing. Anyway, the ear pads, as I mentioned, are very cushy and very plush. And while my ears don't completely fit inside, I do have rather large ears. The pads are soft enough that the pressure that they put on my earlobe here at the bottom wasn't all that uncomfortable. After hours of wear, really didn't have any issues. The seal is a little bit sensitive to glasses. I wear blue light blocking glasses when I'm working late, and I did notice a slight reduction in sub and mid bass while wearing glasses versus not wearing glasses. It wasn't an enormous difference, but it was noticeable to me, so be aware of that if you're a bespectacled listener. The cups do get a bit warm, which is honestly normal for closed backs, especially with these non-vented leatherette pads. Here's a thermal image of my ear before wearing them. So keep an eye on the surface temperature of my skin, particularly there in the ear. And then here's a photo after 1 hour of wearing the Atheia at an ambient temperature of 75.6 degrees. Yeah, you can see the jump in temperature there. I probably won't be wearing these for too long on a hot day. I mentioned the clamp force earlier as well. It's roughly in line with things like the Harmonicdyne Eris. In my usage, it wasn't uncomfortably strong in terms of clamp, but it also wasn't super secure in terms of my hard rock headbanging test. Moderate headbanging would cause the headband to slide forward and back on my head, leading me to have to readjust them. All the weight of this headphone is in these heavy wooden ear cups, so they stay put while the rest of the headphone sort of moves forward and back on your head. Tightening it down does help, but honestly not all that much. That's pretty typical, honestly, for headphones in this overall price range with this build quality. I think the Atheia are super comfy. The only downsides are that heat buildup that I talked about, again, typical of closebacks, and the lack of headbang ability, which again, typical for sort of audiophile-ish type headphones. The self-adjusting strap that doesn't return to 0 is a minor complaint. It does the job well. And the fact that, like I said, there's no elastic means that it's one less thing to wear out in the long term. As far as my wife and her much smaller head and tinier ears, she thought that these were very comfortable. She was able to wear them for a full day of video calls and meetings while at home. Easy pass on the tiny ears test. She had 0 complaints about the fit. There are some headphones in my collection that don't fit her securely, even when I have them adjusted on the smallest setting. So well done, Kiwi ears, for taking into consideration small ears and heads as well as giant ones like mine. Before we get into the audio evaluation, a quick word on source pairing and impedance matching with the Atheia here. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the impedance graph for the Kiwi ears Atheia. Now, if you don't know what you're looking at, no worries. I'm going to do my best to explain this as simple as I possibly can. Basically, the flatter that line is, the less the frequency response will change when you expose this headphone to a higher output impedance source or when you're using an impedance adapter. The important thing to note here is the scale of the y-axis of this graph. The difference between the lowest point and the highest point of this graph is roughly 22 ohms. Highest point being around 42 ohms, lowest one being around 22 ohms. 20 ohm difference is honestly pretty small potatoes compared to some of the other headphones that I've tested. Those can have differences up to 100 ohms on their graph. That being said, it isn't as flat as some of the other headphones I've measured. What this essentially means is that if you're using sources with a higher output impedance, like a transformerless tube amp, aka an OTL, it'll have a slight effect on the sound. Also, if you're using impedance adapters, it will have an effect on the sound. For example, here's an example of the frequency response for the Atheia using a 75 ohm impedance adapter. As you can see, the frequencies in the impedance graph that were sort of above the average get boosted, and the ones that were sort of below the average are cut accordingly. I wouldn't say the differences here are extremely noticeable, at least on my gear, but it is something to keep in mind as you're shopping for these. One last thing, if you are going to use these on an OTL tube amp, the relatively low impedance of 32 ohms on these means that some amplifier designs might trigger what is called a capacitance low-pass filter effect. And what that'll do is it will reduce the bass response on these. So it's another thing to consider. It's going to vary amp to amp based on the design. Just keep that in mind. So let's jump right into the sound of the Atheia, starting off with the bass, which is not neutral at all. There's definitely a big bass emphasis going on here. The sub bass rumbles nicely, but there's nothing compared to the impact that the mid bass has here. The mid bass on the Atheia is some of the most energetic bass I have heard in quite a while. It is pretty fun with the right tracks, but on certain tracks, the sort of balance or lack thereof leads to a little bit of an unnatural presentation. I noticed it on Psychic Type's Victory Road remix, for example. The main bass beat is around 45-ish hertz according to my spectrogram, and while it rumbles and feels pretty nice in the ears, it's very much overshadowed by the higher drops in the 60 to 100 hertz range. It's still a very fun and engaging listening experience, and I don't think the track is ruined by any means, but it's just a little bit uneven for my tastes. Kick drums and bass drums are very well represented as well as bass guitars. I didn't find very much wrong tonally with the presentation of those instruments. The famous bass line in Dire Straits' Sultans of Swing sounds really present in the mix with good emphasis to the sound. It doesn't lose out as the rest of the instruments come into the track, and the kick drum, similarly, is very authoritative in sound, and it doesn't get drowned out in the replay. I mentioned it earlier, but the bass overall here comes off to me as a little uneven. The rumbly sub-bass lacks in presence compared to the more energetic parts of the mid-bass. It seems to come across to me more in electronic tracks than it does in rock or pop. Some rap tracks also sound a bit off in the bass. Bass guitars and drums, as I said, are mostly fine in terms of tonality and sound, so bass overall, a little uneven, but not terrible. The mids here follow the trend of the bass in that they're also colored, but uneven. The lower mids came across to me as a little lean sounding. They weren't really tonally bothered by the bass boost all that much. The lower piano notes and bits of Phil Collins' voice that are lower in the register in Genesis's That's All are actually very clean sounding. To me, they actually lacked a little bit of weight and body, but when Phil reached up in his voice to the higher registers, he got a little bit echoey and slightly thin, not to the point where I found that it ruined the replay, but it was definitely a colored presentation of this track. Female vocals and the higher pitched instruments are, boosted. It contrasts with the leaner lower mids. You got leaner lower mids and boosted upper mids. Kimiko's vocals in NaNoWriMe's Kyokyo Jitsu Jitsu seemed more forward than I'm used to. That and the distortion pedals on Jun's guitar were just a bit more in my face than I'm typically used to hearing on this track. Again, it's a coloration. I can 100% see how some people would find that sort of shouty, echoey tonality not very pleasing at all. But I also know a bunch of people who are like, oh, extra distortion, more forward vocals, give me some more of that. They're really going to love that extra energy up here. The mids, like the bass, are uneven. I feel like the focus falls on the upper mids by contrast to the lower mids, especially when it comes to female vocals. That, distortion pedals on guitars, the upper half of the piano, violins, other things in that range, all of those are going to be boosted up. The fact that the lower mids are recessed, I feel, makes that upper mid-range pop even more. They're going to be maybe a little bit fatiguing, as I said, for some people, so keep that in mind if you're considering this set, but also remember, a lot of people really would like that tonality here. Moving on to the upper mids and treble. As I mentioned just now, the upper mids are a point of emphasis for this set. Female vocal harmonics are forward, just like the fundamentals. The vibrato and overtones that are thrown off of Cyndi Lauper's vocals and Girls Just Want to Have Fun, I feel, are very well represented on this set. They aren't exactly overblown, however. The decay is maybe just a hair quick, with a bit of a softer tonality to what I usually expect. It isn't a bad sound, it's just a little bit different. As we move into the treble, I was expecting to find it to be, sharp, incisive, crispy, because of that undampened planar just sitting there in the middle of the cups. And honestly, I didn't really get that here. I found the treble mostly subdued and kind of pleasant. There are some bright spots here and there with some songs that I tried, but nothing that I could reliably replicate. I think it's more down to the specific mastering of that track than the headphones themselves. I threw Psych Rock at it by Pierre Henry. That's a real pain to listen to on really fatiguing headphones, and honestly, these were just fine. There might be some long-term fatigue that sets in at louder volumes over long listening sessions, but I personally didn't find this fatiguing at all. The tones were sharp but not piercing. They were incisive but not cutting. They were very fast but not fatiguingly fast. The replay is also nice and airy. I think overall it's a very pleasant treble. Personally, I understand Kiwi Ears' goal in not boosting the treble any more than they did. These drivers have a history of being rather fatiguing in IEMs. I think maybe a little bit of extra sparkle would have been nice. I have a lot of full-size planar headphones, stuff like the Edition XS, the Dan Clark Aeon X Closed. Those sound a bit more planar-ish than this, but then again, that planar-ish sound has a lot of detractors, and it isn't for everyone. And while this has a lot of that upper mids focus, it plays things pretty safe in terms of treble. When it comes to overall technical performance, while the low end is mid-bass focused, the sub-bass is still boosted relatively to what I would consider a neutral tuning, that the low frequency events are very well resolved. That massive orchestral bass drum at the beginning of John Williams' The Droid Invasion from Star Wars Episode 1, those hits are rendered very, very well. You can make out good amounts of mallet texture as it strikes the big drum skin, and the timpani that comes in shortly afterwards sounds very big in the ears. At the opposite end of the spectrum, I mentioned the treble being a bit more subdued than I would have imagined, but it's still very resolving. The high piano notes at the beginning of Oscar Peterson's Georgia on My Mind sound really crisp. They have excellent texture and dynamics to them. They don't feel overcooked to me at all. That being said, this isn't the most technical sound I've heard at this price range. I don't have a ton of sets to compare it to, so take my comparison here with a big pinch of salt. But compared to other closebacks I've tried, in terms of pure technical performance, I would put this between the FiiO FT1 and Dan Clark's Aeon X Closed, but it's much closer to the FT1 than it is to the Aeon X Closed. When it comes to stereo separation and Soundstage, being a closed-back headphone, I wasn't really expecting anything special. The performance overall here is what I would expect from a closed-back headphone. Nothing amazing, nothing really bad. Mediterranean Sundance sounded nice and wide enough for me to appreciate the separation between the guitarists, and while the tonality wasn't what I would call claustrophobic, it came off to me as more intimate than I would particularly prefer on this track. It's a similar situation in terms of perceived 3D soundstage. While the imaging is great in Simon & Garfunkel's Scarborough Fair, you can easily tell where the guitar, the flutes, the harpsichord are around you. They don't feel appreciably further away from you compared to other closed-back headphones I tried. I would say this is right in line with basically all of the other closed-backs I've tried in terms of stereo separation and perceived 3D soundstage, but as you would expect, this doesn't come even close to a good open-backed headphone, but you don't expect it to. It's a closed-back. So, the Atheia then. It's definitely not a neutral tuning. It's got a definite coloration to the sound signature here. I would personally describe it as a sort of M-shaped signature. You've got the sub-bass below the boosted mid-bass. Then you've got a subdued lower mids, boosted upper mids, and then a subdued treble. So M-shaped. For comparison today, I've rounded up some other closed-back headphones that I have. I'll do my best to do a good comparison for y'all. Just don't expect to see any open backs in this comparison. I will say I will not be bringing out the Dan Clark Aeon X Closed. It's just way too different from the Atheia to be a meaningful comparison. The Aeon X Closed is a bright-leaning, neutral tuning with a very accurate, sharp, but subdued bass, whereas everything we're going to be looking at today essentially has boosted bass and is colored in one way or another. Before I get into the comparisons, however, I wanted to talk about the graphs that y'all are going to be seeing in the video. If you're a regular viewer, you know that I don't tend to talk about graphs, but I do like to provide graphs for y'all because I feel they make for a good visual aid, and I know there's people out there who like to use graphs to get sort of an apples-to-apples idea to compare different headphones to one another. So I looked at the prices for the sort of AliExpress-style rigs that use 7-Eleven couplers, as well as used grass stands, sort of 3D printed solutions that use the couplers I already have, the prices of some, pinna. But in the end, like every other cut price operation out there, the job has gone to the lowest bidder. That said, meet Leonard. Leonard is a mini DSP hears, and I managed to get Leonard for around 1/3 of what he typically costs new, which is really, really cheap. Now, Leonard here is kind of, let's say, terrible at his job. It's taken me months of trial and error and, trying different things and coming up with methodologies and doing things, just learning the ins and outs of all of Leonard's quirks to be able to measure headphones even remotely consistently and repeatably. As any real actual headphone reviewer will tell you, the graphs that Leonard here produces are cursed. They're not anything even remotely close to being accurate. These are not real ears. They don't behave the same way. They're not the same size or shape. This is not human skin. This doesn't have bones, flesh, the real thickness doesn't behave like human skin. Humans don't have perfectly cylindrical ear canals. So this is not going to be accurate at all. But for the price I paid, the graphs I've been able to generate have sort of the general shape and trends of those generated by people with much better gear. It sort of starts off high, then gets a little bit low in the middle, then goes up and then down. Leonard represents that, and that's what we're doing here. One day I will upgrade to a better solution, but for right now, Leonard has the job. One thing, do not compare my graph to the graphs of other reviewers. My graphs are only internally consistent. You can compare stuff that I've measured on Leonard to other things I've measured on Leonard, but you can't compare things I've measured on Leonard to anyone using those AliExpress 7-Eleven rigs or any 3D printed couplers or people with grass or even the really fancy B&K solutions. Okay? Take all of the graphs you're about to see with a shipping container full of salt and only compare my graphs with my graphs and nobody else's. Even people with other mini DSP ears, the calibration files are all different, and I'm using raw data, nothing compensated. So that's all you need to know. So first up for comparisons, we've got what is probably the most hyped closed-back release of 2024. Well, maybe the Noir X, but it's the FiiO FT1, priced at $150 US. The FT1 here also features what I would call a colored sound, but of the things we're going to be looking at today, this is probably the most traditionally neutral of the whole group. It also happens to be the most affordable. In terms of comfort, between these two, I much prefer the Atheia. While the overall weight of both of these is roughly similar, the Atheia has a self-adjusting headband mechanism with much softer padding, as well as cushier stock pads and less overall clamping force. The FiiO's headband is not awful, but I know a lot of people are putting capper straps on these to help with the weight, and the pads are just not as squishy as the ones on the Atheia. They both come with hard cases. Let me pull those out. So you've seen the one on the Kiwi ears, and this is the one for the FiiO. The FiiO one, in my opinion, is much nicer. It's just a bit more crush resistant. The FiiO also comes with two cables. You get the regular single-ended 3.5 with a 1/4 inch adapter, and you get a 4.4 mil balanced cable in the case. The Atheias are much better built, in my opinion, compared to the FT1. The materials feel better, sturdier, just more robust. The FT1's ear cups can feel a bit plasticky around these edges here, and the adjustment band here looks indexed, but my particular model isn't all that indexed. It feels very loose. But, this is half the price of that, so I don't expect it to be as nicely built as this one. It makes sense. As far as sound goes, however, the FT1 compared to the Atheia sounds almost neutral. It's still colored, but much less so. The FT1, I will say, wins in terms of sub bass. It's got a much more satisfying rumble to the sound in the lower frequencies compared to the Atheia. But the Atheia has that super thumpy mid bass that's way more energetic than what the FT1 has to offer. In terms of mid range, the FT1's lower mids are more balanced. They have, that warmer, richer tonality and less emphasis in the upper mids. It's a more natural, tonality overall compared to the more vocal-focused, lean lower mids on the Atheia. The FT1 also has a tiny bit of extra treble sparkle that I was saying might be missing from the Atheia. It's not a whole lot, but it is noticeable in my listening tests. What I would say is, if you want something that's more of an all-rounder that would work with basically all genres but still leans warm overall, the FT1 is probably the way to go. Whereas I would say if your library is full of, pop music with mostly female vocalists, you might really prefer the coloration of the Atheia. Next up, at $200, we've got the Meze 99 Noir. Essentially a 99 classic, but with different accessories and a different choice of hardware and wood. In terms of comfort here, it's really going to depend on your overall head shape. I personally prefer the Mezes. Not only are they 80 grams lighter, but the clamp force is also less intense. In terms of build, these two are very similar. They both have those twin beam headbands. They both have suspension straps. Both have walnut cups. The Atheia's cups do have much more swivel to them, but the cups on the 99 swivel, in my opinion, just the right amount to have good comfort and seal on your ears. They both rely, like I said, on those self-adjusting headbands. The one on the Atheia, as I mentioned, does not return to zero. The one on the 99 Classics is spring-loaded, so it does go back to zero, which I prefer. I will say the padding is nicer on the Atheia versus the 99 Classics, so another thing to consider. Both come with hard cases. Again, I think the one that comes with the 99 Classics, or 99 Noir, is much sturdier and nicer than the one on the Atheia. It's also smaller, therefore a bit more portable. Meze's stock cable is more prone to memory, but it does include a microphone and inline controls, which make it better for on-the-go use. One final thing I need to mention, as a guy who dabbles in headphone mods and repairs, Meze will essentially sell you any repair parts that you need, or replacement parts, to keep the 99 Classic series going. I really like that. It makes for a longer-lived product. I will say Kiwi Ears has committed to selling pads and bands, so that's a step in the right direction. So hopefully that holds true. In terms of sound, both of these, again, colored in different ways. The Meze is more traditionally warm. You've got smooth, boosted, punchy bass, a recession in the upper mids and upper treble. The lower mids are thick, rich. Some folks would call them muddy. I personally don't mind the tonality down there. I think it works well for a lot of music. The Atheia is cleaner in the lower mids for sure, and it's also punchier in the mid bass. It can't match the Meze in terms of sub bass rumble or rattle. The Meze actually has a little bit more sparkle to certain percussion and instrument harmonics. Certain cymbals just sound a bit nicer on the Meze, despite the Atheia having a bit more air overall. Essentially, the Meze comes off as the more relaxing, chill, all-around, long listening session set, while the Atheia is definitely the more contrasty, fun, and exciting listen here. And now, for the most colored sound we'll see today, we have the polarizing Harmonicdyne collab with Zeus Pantera from the famous Z Cooks channel on YouTube. This is Eris, priced at $250 US. In terms of comfort, Eris is the heaviest headphone that we've seen today, but it's also quite comfortable due to the absurdly thick padding on the headrest up here, as well as the pads, which are just super plush and super comfortable. In terms of overall comfort, Eris is going to get the win here from me. Just barely. I know people will prefer the suspension headband style on the Atheia, but Eris is just super comfy, and I think the killer app for me on Eris is the fact that despite being mostly closed back, these cups actually don't get all that hot compared to the other three here with their wooden cups. In terms of build quality, however, the Atheia absolutely smashes Eris. While wearing Eris, I do hear some creaks. The adjustment mechanism on here doesn't feel super secure to me in some places. Some of the plastic quality is not the greatest. This glass is nice, but like this ring here is already a bit loose. I just feel like the Atheia is much more solid, much sturdier. It just feels higher quality. It feels like it could survive a few knocks. In terms of included accessories, the Atheia comes with a carry case, whereas on Eris you just get headphones, the cable, not really much else. In terms of sound, honestly, Eris sounds to me like the Atheia's spunky, excitable, immature little sister. They both have hugely boosted mid-bass, but while the Atheia features sort of lessened sub-bass, kind of like the Eris, Eris has thicker, warmer, lower mids. Some people, again, would call it muddy. Some people like that tonality. They're thick, warm mids, whatever you think, compared to the recessed lower mids on Atheia. In the upper mids, again, opposites. The Atheia has those boosted upper mids, whereas Eris recesses the upper mids really to no end. Eris comes off much more V-shaped than the Atheia, especially once you get to the treble. Eris can famously be quite peaky and fatiguing in the treble, to the point where I actually wear it the reversed way. Reverse Eris has a bit less treble and a bit less bass. It's my preferred way of listening to Eris. But I will say that even in the reversed form, the Atheia is the more relaxing listen to my ears. Going back and forth between these two was kind of hilarious. While the bass presentation here is sort of similar, the fact that the mid-range is diametrically opposed was so hilariously different to listen to. Really fun, honestly. Both sets are extremely colored. If you like treble sparkle and those thick, lush lower mids, Eris is the way to go. But if you prefer cleaner lower mids and boosted female vocals, the Atheia is the answer here. So let me move this case out of the way, and we'll do a real quick wrap-up of the group here. So, FT1. Relatively speaking, this is the most neutral headphone here. They also have the best sub-bass rumble, and in my opinion, the best overall tonal balance of anything on the table in terms of overall sound signature. They are, however, the cheapest. Of the table, I would say they're about equal in build quality to Eris, but, you know, they're also the cheapest, so understandable. Up next, you've got the 99 Classics. They're actually quite similar to the FT1. They're much better built, but they've got recessed upper mids and a more down-tilted treble presentation, so they aren't as neutral as the FT1. Super relaxing, in my opinion, probably the most comfortable headphone here, designed with travel in mind, and with the easy availability of replacement parts. I feel like this is a good choice for the buy-it-for-life crowd. Eris, what can I say? Her reputation precedes her. The bass violence headphone is packing an absurd amount of mid-bass and a lot of treble. She's also super comfy to wear, but the build quality to me feels a little bit lacking at this price, and the tuning, let's face it, is not going to be to everyone's tastes. There's really nothing else like her on the market today, however, and if you like what she's offering, she's absolutely fantastic at it. Finally, you have the Atheia. You get Eris levels of mid-bass, a non-fatiguing treble presentation, and an upper mids focus that makes female vocals and pop music stand out in either a good way that you're going to like, or in a way that's going to be maybe a bit too much for you. It's a color of sound that I'm sure some people will really enjoy, even if not everyone's going to enjoy it. But let's go ahead and pull up the empty headphones edition of the Audio Amigo Arbitrary Rating Scale and figure out where the first entry is going to go. The Atheia here is a very well built, very well packaged headphone. I love seeing included carry cases. It makes storing and traveling with headphones just so much less stressful. If you don't come with one, I'm going to buy one anyway, so it just saves me a little bit of money. Like to see it. The cable here, while not perfect, is still rather nice, and the weird issue with the wiring appears to have been ironed out before production ramped up. If for some reason you do have one that's affected, go ahead and reach out. You'll be taken care of. It's a funny case where the reviewers are the ones that ended up with non-golden samples, which, hey, is kind of nice. The sound here isn't neutral or natural by any means, but it isn't unpalatable. I don't mind colored sound. The upper mids focus here will be shouty and fatiguing for some folks. I had a pretty great time listening to J-pop virtual YouTubers, K-pop, 80s power ballads on this thing. I feel like poppier female vocals just do pretty well here, as long as that extra energy is compatible with your ears and your brain. I think it served pretty well as Kiwi Ear's current top-of-the-range model. The build quality honestly put some of its competition on notice. And in my opinion, they got the most difficult parts of the headphone experience right. They got the comfort, the drivability, the overall design. They all did very, very, very well here. Yeah, the tuning's not going to be for everyone, but as you might know from watching my IEM reviews, again, I don't mind coloration in audio so long as it's not actively hurting my ears or my brain. and it can work well for multiple genres. The tuning's not perfect, but there are several genres I think that will benefit from this coloration. The Kiwi Ears Atheia is going to be earning the "but I like this" rating. It's a bit too adventurous in the upper mids for me to be able to give it a higher rating than this, but in all honesty, the tuning is the only thing holding it back. The comfort, build, accessories, I feel are all really solid. Considering this is Kiwi Ear's first headphone in this price range, I think they actually did a pretty good job. That said, I don't think the Atheia is for everyone, so let's go ahead and discuss who I would actually recommend this for. The Atheia is not for those who are looking for a neutral sound signature. It also isn't for those who want the absolute best soundstage or imaging performance in a headphone. But as I mentioned, those people are probably going to be looking at open backs instead. This also isn't for people who are sensitive to a shouty or sort of overcooked female vocal tonality or instrument harmonics. It also isn't for people who really like sub-bass rumble. Yes, the Atheia has good sub-bass rumble, but it's really overshadowed, I feel, by the boosted mid-bass. However, if you like emphasized upper mids, especially if you have a library full of female vocals, I think you will really enjoy these. Also, if you like the sort of mid-bass presentation that Eris had, but you were sort of put off by the thicker lower mids and the very sharp treble, this can be a better built, more refined replacement for Eris. Just don't expect the super warmed over mid-range that Eris had. It's really quite the opposite there. Finally, if you're an EQ wizard and you want a unique driver combination to sort of play around with as a fun base for EQ tuning, it's a pretty good set to do it with. It's not super expensive. Both drivers are pretty good. I think it's a fun, sort of EQ project if you want to try different tunings with the drivers. But that's going to wrap up my first ever headphone review. I have at least one more headphone to review for sure that I've been sent, so look forward to that one. But what do y'all think about this? Are headphones something I should be doing more often? Do y'all find my takes good? Does my review style translate well for headphone content? Let me know in the comments below any suggestions, comments, quips. But for now, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch y'all next time.